you everyone for being here. This interview of Colonel Nicholas J. Sheppard is being conducted by Michelle Siegel and Vinay Rosedal. Today is November 10th, 2017 at New Canaan High School. Colonel Sheppard, thank you very much for being here.
Oh.
Could you tell us where and when you were born?
Oh, I was there, but I didn't know what was going on. In New York City, December 6, 1926.
And was there anyone in your life as a young man who influenced your decision?
Pardon?
Was there anyone in your life when you were a young man who influenced you to enter the Marines?
Oh, let me see now. I have a little problem hearing. My ears are 91 years old, so they're not functioning as well as they used to. Now, what was the question?
Was there anyone in your life as a young man who influenced your decision to enter the Marines?
No.
No?
I just read the local papers as to what was going on. This was right in, it was in the middle of, or near the end of World War II. I was, at that time, I was a senior in high school, and I decided to join the Marine Corps. And when I graduated, I was called up.
So was your life pretty average as a high school student before you entered the service?
Beg pardon?
What was your life, just the life of a general high school student before you entered the Marines?
Before I went?
Yes.
It certainly wasn't anywhere near the World War II situation. I was in Florida, actually, at the time. But then I traveled all over. My father was an engineer, and it was during the war, the beginning of the war, and etc. So he went wherever the government sent him, and he dragged me along with my brothers and sisters.
So how old were you again when you entered into the Marines?
17.
You're 17. What was it like to be so young in the Marines?
Well, it wasn't so really difficult or shocking because practically everybody that I was with was 17 years old. And besides, that's about the age level that the Marine Corps was getting recruits at the time. And they already anticipated the kind of problems that a kid coming out of high school going into a military situation. And this was in Parris Island, South Carolina, where they had their what they call boot camp, which is recruit training program. So actually it was fascinating. And it was very interesting to get to meet so many people, or kids my age at that time.
Can you describe any specific experiences from your younger years of service and training?
Well, most of the experiences you had at that time going through the recruit training, I was getting familiar with the equipment. Even the clothing was different, of course. And then learning how to use the equipment that would be required, ultimately weapons of that nature. And also how to function as a unit, which is what the drilling exercises are designed to do, is to more or less convince you you're no longer an individual operating alone. You're part of some size unit, and you have a function which they tell you what it is, and supposedly you've been trained to do it.
Do you remember any specific functions you had in your early units?
Specific functions?
Yeah.
Well, most of them were learning how to shoot accurately, how to march, how to take care of your clothing and equipment. For the vast majority of the recruits, it was a whole new experience. And there was no mama around to help out, or brothers or sisters or anyone else. Even though you weren't on your own, in a sense you were isolated, nonetheless you felt like it.
Okay. What wars were you a part of?
Big pardon?
What wars did you fight in?
Which one is this?
What wars did you
Oh,
serve in?
which wars? Well, not the Revolutionary War. I was a little young for that. Well, World War II, mostly near the end of the war at that time. Of course, it was over in 45, August of 45, as far as the Pacific is concerned, and of course in June for Europe. And then there was a gap there between 1945 and 1950 when the North Koreans invaded South Korea, and the United States decided we had to protect them. They were an ally, but also because there was a large contingent of American Army forces in South Korea, and they were being attacked by the North Koreans. So the government said, we got to go and protect them and save them and throw the North Koreans back into their mountains.
Okay. Could you teach us about some of the conditions were during the Korean War?
There were conditions.
Or the conditions that you faced as a
I
soldier?
mean, like physical conditions, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the worst one was some guy didn't want to be there and he was shooting at you. It was very difficult in the first of all, from the terrain. In the section that I participated in, where'd my map go?
Oh, it's over to your left.
Oh, okay. We came in from the south and worked north, crossed the DMZ, which is what it is now, into North Korea itself. And ultimately, the U.S. got all the way up here. And then the Chinese came in. And that changed the whole concept of how to fight this war. Besides which, it was very, very difficult because this is all mountains. And in the end of the year, winter came, and winter was just horrible because up here, you can't see it on this map, is Siberia. And the wind came down from Siberia right through Manchuria and into North Korea. And the weather got around 0. And since you were in mountainous area, it was always windy. And of course, when the snow came, it became very difficult to move anything. And at that time, and has been since World War II, we tended to rely militarily on big equipment that required movement. Not only just the artillery, trucks, tanks, and things like that. And in this area, there are no, I-95s or anything like that. And you just had to make your own roads. The Koreans did not build, prior to the war, did not build a road system worth a damn. It was all just plain old dirt roads for the most part, until you got to Seoul or some of the big cities.
So are there any specific experiences that you yourself had during the war that you can teach us about?
Specific experiences?
That you had with your unit?
Well, first of all, I should say, at that time I was a second lieutenant, and then I got promoted eventually to first lieutenant, etc. But in any event, my job was to command a rifle platoon, which was 44 people, 44 Marines, made up of what they call squads, 3 squads to the platoon, and a squad is made up of 3 fire teams of 4 men each. Okay, they carried all the weapons, mostly automatic weapons when you can get them. And then we had support from machine gun units that we attached when we were attacking. And then we also have mortars, mortar units in reserve to support. any of our actions when we were attacking the enemy. So the experience was, how do I get all this organized, follow the orders I get from the company commander, and go ahead and get them.
So could you describe your lifestyle while you were overseas in Korea but not in combat?
Rather basic and crude and very, very uncomfortable. For a variety of reasons. Not just the fact that these characters were unfriendly, but also because it was so new. And living on top of a mountain and hoping you're going to get some food and new resupply of weapons, things like that. That was quite an experience, which you had to adjust to in a hurry.
What were common pastimes that you and your unit would partake in?
What was what?
Common pastimes?
The common pastime? When you had free time and you weren't concentrating on getting rid of the enemy, you slept and ate. There's an old rule in the military service, particularly when you're in a combat environment. When you get a chance to sleep, always sleep. Because you may never know when the next chance is going to come. And the same is true of eating. So that's our pastime.
How has your view of your service in the war changed over time?
Well, I would say, and by the way, I was also a history major in college. So I've always been fascinated by the history. What has happened is the military service has become more and more complicated because they have added more and more very sophisticated weaponry. And you have to learn how to use it. Not only how to use it in a physical sense to make it function, but how to use it tactically in order to get the best use out of it versus the enemy. And that was a change, a real change between World War II, the Korean War, and then of course the Vietnam War was entirely different because the environment there was radically different from Korea. So the people who had served in Korea, or even in World War II, when they got to Vietnam, it was just pure jungle. And hot, really miserable conditions in that respect. Just the opposite from Korea, at least as to the winter. They didn't have any winter in Vietnam.
So what was the process you went through to become a colonel?
Oh, what you had to do was get promoted. And that was a trick in itself, okay? So you make sure you learn what you're supposed to learn, apply it the way you're supposed to apply that knowledge, and be successful. And the more successful you are in the various missions that are assigned to you, the more likely you're going to get promoted. Because they're always looking for somebody that knows more than they do, or hopefully. So you get promoted on that basis. The other part you need is time. And time in the service brings, hopefully, experience. And experience is critical.
How long did it take you to reach the rank of colonel?
Let's see. When the war started, I was 24. I made colonel when I was 42.
Can you describe the nature of the awards you received?
Big part, oh. The conditions?
The nature of the awards.
Well, the Purple Heart was a simple one because all you had to do was to get injured, wounded by the enemy in combat. Right? So just being there puts you at risk in that respect. As far as the 2 Bronze Stars are concerned, that depended on the awards board and your commanding officers as to, you know, well, do we want to recognize this as being something of a special accomplishment or not? If they thought it was, give them a medal. If it wasn't, forget it. Give them another job. But it's not, you know, something that you get into personally, because it is a personal award.
Do you remember any specific experiences after you received your awards? Like any moments where you reflected on your service?
No, it had no effect at the time because it was still during the war. So they did that in the rear and then with the echelons that were behind. You just showed up one day for an hour or 2 and then back up into the mountains. And you hope you could get a cup of coffee at least while you're down there. Maybe yes, maybe no.
Now that you've been out of the service for quite some time, how would you say that you've been affected by your experiences?
Well, if you start with the age of 17, and I came out of the service after 42 years in the Marine Corps Reserve in 1986, you just matured. Right? And the maturity rate depended upon, you know, where you were and what you had to do and what were the results, etc., etc. So I feel that, you know, it was a tremendous experience that provided me with opportunities to learn things that I never would have learned otherwise, to participate in activities where you're unusual, but where you were personally tested. Not only as to how you did things, but how you were able to cause others, the people under your command, to do what they are supposed to do.
Could you describe your experiences of training other Marines?
Training? Training is the toughest job in the military service. It's easier to go shoot and march or do other things like that. But training another individual to do something that the individual has never done, in 99% of the cases anyway, it's very difficult because he's coming from a normal civilian environment, mostly family life, and you're throwing him into, or the government is throwing him into a situation where he's trying to learn how to shoot people and to live under circumstances that not only were so different, but were rather horrendous at times. If for nothing else, you're very uncomfortable. Sleeping on the ground, marching or climbing mountains and things. Nobody ever did that before as a rule.
So where did you train various Marines?
Beg pardon?
Where did you lead training?
Where did I leave? Who?
Where did you train other Marines?
I'm sorry, I'm not getting it.
Okay, don't worry. At what location did you train other Marines?
Oh, where?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's see. At Paris Island in South Carolina, Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, Quantico in Virginia, Camp Pendleton in California, and then in Pearl Harbor when I was there in World War II, and then in Korea, in the rear areas when we were relieved, and go back and then train because there's a constant turnover of personnel. The guys that have been there longer, etc., or we lost people, we got replacements, and we had to check out the replacements to make sure they would know what they're supposed to do and how to do it. But you don't want to put a person without any knowledge or experience into a situation that he's never been in before.
Can you describe any specific experiences you had with younger soldiers, as you were such an experienced trainer?
Well, this would be when I was an officer in Korea, because in World War II, they were all my age, and people I had experience with. It's very difficult because, again, I'm getting people that are coming from an entirely different and safe environment into an environment which was just, a nightmare. Most of them, both not only mentally, but physically. And that you're responsible as their lieutenant to get them trained to accept that and learn how to use the new knowledge they're getting, the new training, in situations where they've never been there before. And on an aside, most of the fighting we were involved in was at night, because we had so much more and better equipment for combat than the North Koreans did. They used stealth, cover, concealment, and things like that to attack us, which they would do periodically, and this was constant. So they came at night, and even though our positions in the mountainous areas were always on the ridge lines, right on the top, down below, going to the next range or ridges, it was like a jungle. A lot of cover and concealment. So they would just crawl up at night and get as close as they could and then start shooting. And they had a special weapon. We called it a Burt gun because it sounded like that when they fired it. It was a submachine gun that every one of them had. And it had a magazine that carried 50 rounds. And then they carried extra magazines with them when they expended the 50 in the first one. And so then all of a sudden they'd come out of nowhere, out of the dark, and start shooting, which is very unfriendly. But in any event, we had to shoot back. And then we would try to get up and then take this opportunity, since now you found them, in a sense, attack them in return the favor. And that's one way we kept moving. Because otherwise, it's very hard to find them during the daytime. And besides, in the daytime, the war was really fought by the artillery and by the aircraft, the bombers, the strafers, because they could see then, targets, and they would attack during the day. And in that sense, we're trying to eliminate their major weaponry. They didn't have tanks where we were. The tanks were way over here, where there was a valley, a big series of valleys leading into the capital area of Seoul. And that's where they attacked originally, because they could get everything in movement with trucks and as well as tanks and things like that.
So, do you remember the process of pushing forward your military as being slow?
Moving forward?
Because you said before that when you were attacked, you would attack back and then you would move forward. Do you remember that being a slow process?
They came down in June of 1950, okay, and they kept coming till we could get our reinforcements into the country. And they came all the way down to Nakon and this river. And that's when we finally got enough Americans in there we could stop them. And then we started to push. I wasn't there at the time, but of course I know what they did. General MacArthur moved the Marines all the way around and up to here, to Seoul, to that area. This was all occupied by the North Koreans at the time. So what, in effect, he did is he cut off their ability to go back to North Korea. And then we had, you know, big war, big shooting around. And eventually, we pushed the ball back. And then, in December 1950, the Chinese came in, the Chinese army. And that created a big problem. Okay. And then they pushed us back. And then we had to push them back. And this is, you know, up and down, etc. And eventually, we were on our way back to the north and got back there. And the Russian government worked on the United States government and said, let's have an armistice. Because they were losing. And they didn't want to lose this country. Because it was a communist country, and it fit right into their plans, I guess. So they had an armistice, and we still are an armistice, in effect. And theoretically, they could renew this war anytime they want, but they don't want to. It's changed quite a bit since then.
Is there anything that you remember specifically from the war that most people probably would not know about?
What people? The American public?
The American public, yes.
Well, so many things happen to begin with, okay? And then a great portion of that is not disclosed publicly for a variety of good purposes or reasons, okay? So you're getting half pictures, sort of, half stories. And sometimes there's some fill-in to make the story they are telling acceptable. Otherwise, they'd say, hey, wait a minute, that can't be so. So they have to be very careful. And they don't want to give away information about our activities or our plans or anything that the enemy could get some advantage from. So it's very confusing. And it's very difficult for the American public, in my opinion, to understand what's going on. And primarily, of course, each individual has some connection to the war through the personal relationships with the members of the services. And that's the only thing they're really interested in. The big picture is just too big and too confusing, too involved to really, you know, get an accurate view of what's going on and why, if nothing else.
All right, thank you all again for being here. Colonel Sheppard, it's been an honor to speak with you, and thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colonel Sheppard, can I ask you one other question?
Sure.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us before we end the interview? Or finish up? And we have a couple other questions maybe from the audience, but I wanted to give you a chance to cover anything you think we didn't cover or we didn't get to maybe.
Well, you know, honestly, it's a little difficult for me to remember what we did cover, so can't think of anything to add.
Fair enough, thank you.
Without just repeating myself.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I wanted to make sure we had that opportunity.
Okay.
Would you be willing to answer a couple of questions from the audience?
Too difficult.
Sure. Okay. We'll go for only easy questions from the audience. What do we have?
In 1 or 2 syllables.
Two syllables only. Yes. Yes. And I'll repeat the question if we can.
What is the biggest takeaway or lesson that you got from your experiences?
So she's asking the biggest takeaway or lesson that you've learned from serving in the military.
Well, when you first get an order to do something, you look at it and say, can't be done. Because you don't know all the facts to begin with. all the things that would apply to the situation. And that creates a real problem for the individual officers and personnel. But then you start to learn how to do things. And the best part of military training is it matures you to a point where you realize I've got to organize my thinking. I've got to get all the facts. And I got to find the objectives. And then I got to find out what have I got to work with. And then you got to meld it all together to accomplish the mission that's assigned to you. That's quite a bit of training. And actually, I would suspect that's what they do in all the business schools in this country. Same basic principle. Get the facts, learn the mission, and find out how you can do all this with the assistance that is available.
Thank you. Another question? Yes.
You said the North Koreans would attack at night, so I guess when would you sleep?
The question was if the North Koreans would attack at night, when did sleep happen?
That's why when you got some pastime to do nothing, you slept. Because you didn't get too much sleep when they were attacking. You know, it's like in some jobs you have in this country. You got to find your own time to take a quick nap or something. Even fall asleep at your desk. Hopefully not in school. Life was very difficult, which is why you don't get a bunch of old guys in there trying to fight this war. They wouldn't last physically. So you just more or less catnap.
Thanks. Another question?
How has your perspective on life changed after serving in the military?
How has your perspective in life changed after serving in the military?
Well, it's a test. It's a test as to your personal ability to do what other people want you to do, whether you like it or not. And of course, your first objective is to find out what's so important about this particular order. You know, why do we have to do this? But you got to do that very quietly, you know, because you're supposed to know or anticipate why you're going to be doing what you're going to do. But you'd like to be reassured that, yeah, everybody's on the same page that you're going to be on. So you got all the assistance you need to accomplish the mission.
Another question?
What was your reasoning behind choosing the Marines over another branch?
So the question is, why the Marines? Why did you choose the Marines?
Oh, well, I've always liked that, a small organization. I figured the Army was so big, you get lost. In a way, it still is. The Navy is essentially technology. It's engineering to a great extent. Coming out of Annapolis, they are primarily engineers because everything they work with is in a way a piece of equipment, starting with the aircraft carriers, battleships, etc. The Marine Corps was small, comparatively speaking, and you get more recognition. You don't have to learn so many people's names and things like that. Figure it's a special group, you know, and that's fine. It's like going to a special school. You look for special schools to go to and hope you can get in if they teach what you want to learn. And the Marine Corps did.
Any other questions?
Oh, incidentally, in my graduating class in high school, we had about, pretty close to 400 and some odd men. They all went in the Navy and the Army, the Coast Guard, or some other place. By the way, there was no Air Force at that time, as there is now. Sheppard from the Army. It was all the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Army had their own little air forces. So I joined the Marine Corps. Nobody else did. They thought I was crazy. Because it was the time of a couple of battles like Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and the newsreel pictures of those battles were not too encouraging for somebody to want to have a long life. And I said, well, you know, that's a challenge. It's like wanting to play football or something like that. Sure, you can get hurt, but it's a game that you could be really interested in and learn something and grow more mature, more physically able to do things, etc. It was a real opportunity, not just a matter of I've got to go because the government says I got to go.
I think we have time for one or maybe one more question.
I know you mentioned that you were kind of like a history buff, and did that help you in any way during your service?
Has being interested in history helped you in any way in your service?
Oh, yes, in a general sense, of course. You've got to develop a thinking process that says, I'm doing this because it has to be done, it should be done, and I'm one of the people, along with all these other characters, who can do it if we do what we're supposed to do with the training we've had. So on that basis alone, we are accomplishing an historical fact. And it is hoped, everybody that participates in any war at any time hope, that this will settle the problems that caused the war to come about in the first place. Unfortunately, history will tell you that one war just creates a situation for the invention, the development of the need for another war. And on and on and on. And that's what history is filled with. One war after another. And today, that's all there is. Everywhere you look, there's either a war going on, or one about to go on, or one just ending, but it's constant. And that can be very discouraging to people, because nobody except the crazy people want to go to war all the time. There's no real profit in it personally.
Colonel Sheppard, I'd like to thank you for speaking with us today. Thank you for coming here. And,
okay.
I'd like a couple things. I'd like another round of applause